The LEGO Ideas The Globe set is a set that I've been looking forward to for a very long time. I supported the project on LEGO Ideas the first time I saw it, and I've been kind of following its progress since and just hoping that it gets through the stages and becomes an official model. And now that I have the final model in front of me, having built it all, I have to say I'm a bit underwhelmed and slightly disappointed by a few aspects of this, which I'll get into later, but let's start with the unboxing. It's the same 18 plus black box art that you get in all the 18 plus sets these days, which isn't surprising, you know what they look like at this point. But I still maintain that LEGO Idea sets shouldn't just conform to this uniform style of box art. It's just the same black box art that we've seen countless times at this point. The instructions aren't printed on the black background that you might expect. Instead, it's printed on this neutral grey colour, which is a nice compromise, I think. It still gives you that premium feel, but it doesn't sacrifice the readability of the instructions, which you did get fairly often with the black background. There's a good few pages of preamble at the beginning of the instructions, but on the last page, which I think is worth mentioning, they dedicated 2 pages to basically say, oh, while we were putting together and building the globe, we thought to ourselves, well, how can we make the real globe better? How can we build a better future? How can we protect the environment and make the world a better place and all that? And specifically they said, we are committed to protecting the environment. And they talked about how they're using new materials and new packaging to make the product more sustainable. And this is where I think that there's a pretty big missed opportunity with this set, because last year LEGO announced that they would be replacing the plastic packaging with paper bags instead. It feels weird to read that they're so committed to being sustainable and good for the environment, and then 10 minutes later you're ripping open one-use plastics and throwing it on the floor just to throw it away eventually. I think this set should have been the first set to replace these plastic bags with the paper ones instead, but as of now, the paper bags aren't implemented. There's no news on when they'll be implemented. I think it's supposed to be at some point this year, but nonetheless, I think this is a big missed opportunity. Now, the build experience is where this set really disappoints me, because this set has probably the worst build experience I've ever had with a LEGO set. The stand was very fun to put together, especially that really smooth, unstudded section right under it, the kind of neck of it. I think that came together in a really satisfying and cool way, how flush these curved pieces are to each other. It's very similar to the ship in the bottle stand, if you've built that, and just in terms of feel. Then there's the kind of big C piece that actually holds the globe itself. This part isn't as repetitive as you would think. You build the same piece essentially 7 or 8 times, but the process of building each individual one was pretty quick, and it's not the full thing that you're building, you're just building the foundation of it, and then once you're kind of building it into the C shape, you kind of add more onto it to give it strength. I really liked the tiling and just putting it together. It was actually pretty enjoyable. Where this set fails is the actual globe itself. You start with the equator that goes across the center, and this actually comes together in pretty much the exact same way as the hyperdrive ring in the episode 2 Obi-Wan set a few years ago. So if you've built that, you know exactly how this comes together pretty much. Also, in terms of its diameter, it's the exact same size as well as a result. So if you have that set and you're wondering how big the actual globe part is, that's a really good metric to use. That was pretty, I would say, unenjoyable to put together. It was fairly repetitive, even though it is just around the center, which you wouldn't think would be too repetitive. But you're doing essentially the same thing 16 times, and each individual time takes not an awful long time, but when you're doing it so often, you definitely feel it. The only difference in the build experience for each panel is just obviously the landmasses that go on top of it, but they only take like a few seconds max, and you spend a very long time putting the rest of it together. And after that point, it gets really bad, because the rest of the sphere is comprised of 32 sub-assemblies, which can be one of 2 styles. Each sub-assembly takes around 5 to 10 minutes, just as a rough estimate. There isn't much of a difference between one or the other, and when you have to do the same thing essentially 32 times, that's between 3 and 6 hours of doing the exact same thing over and over again, and that's the majority of this build. The stand comes together very quickly, and it feels like you spend 80 or 90% of the time putting together the globe, which is the exact same thing over and over again, and I really can't emphasize that enough. It was the most repetitive and unpleasant build experience I've ever had. Once I finished the northern hemisphere, I was really exhausted by doing it. So I looked through the instruction manual just to see, what's ahead of me. Hopefully, maybe the bottom half is different, I optimistically thought. From pages 101 until 214, it is the exact same 2 steps that you're doing over and over again. The only break you get is building the skeleton core, which comes together very quickly. You don't spend very long on it at all, and even that isn't super interesting to put together. Is the first time I've ever been building a set where I said, I can't do this right now, this is a chore, I'm gonna put it off. And I left it to the side, and I didn't finish it for another 3 days. I've never done that with a Lego set before. Building sets in general is an incredibly enjoyable experience for me, but this was just a chore. Once you've done the northern hemisphere, it's the exact same thing again for the southern one, and each one takes so long to put together. I know I'm harping on the build experience a lot on this set, but it is the thing that I think about the most just looking at this, because it was so unpleasant, to a point that I think it really detracts from the value of this set. To me, the value of a set comes from the build and the final model, and when the build was just this unpleasant, it's hard to look at the final model the same way. Moving on from the build experience, and looking at the sticker usage specifically, every thing you see here is printed. There are no stickers in this set. So the little earth plaque and all of the continents and ocean tiles, those are all printed. Same thing with the compass pieces. I don't know why they decided to make the continents and the ocean tiles glow in the dark. Like, don't get me wrong, it's cool that they can glow in the dark, but I just don't know why. And also the effect of the glow-in-the-dark from my own testing is exaggerated greatly. You do notice it a bit, but it doesn't emit light or anything. It's just kind of, you can see it, which I mean, I guess is glow-in-the-dark. But yeah, there's no stickers in the set, so if you hate stickers, then that's a big bonus for you. Looking at the design, this is where it definitely claws back points in my mind, because the final model does look incredible, and it's way more fun than I expected to just spin it around in a circle. It spins very nicely. There's no friction on it at all, and it kind of keeps its momentum once you feel like it would have stopped. I think the stand looks incredible. I love the little gold accents that kind of make its way throughout the whole thing. It really gives it a premium feel, and it kind of works well alongside something like the ship in the bottle, which also has some gold accents and mostly a wood in finish otherwise. I originally thought that the black elements on the actual stand itself looked out of place and kind of gave it a weird texture, but once I finished the entire thing, the black actually worked pretty nicely with the black sticks, I guess, that kind of give the illusion of sticking through the entire globe. There's a nice balance there of black that I think it would have looked very weird without. The use of the lacquered gold pieces as well, very big fan of. It really gives the thing a antique kind of feel to it. Also, looking at the globe itself, I know I complained a lot about the build experience, but it did need to be that way. There's no other way that I've seen, or definitely that I could think of, to recreate a globe shape in Lego. That is an incredibly difficult thing to do. So while the experience of building it was incredibly unpleasant and super repetitive, it was still a brilliant way to put it together, and it's very commendable that the designers found these techniques. Looking at the actual landmasses themselves, I do have a few issues, mostly around Europe, and I think they made a few mistakes specifically around the Mediterranean area and the UK and Ireland. So there used to be an entire 2-minute segment here about the issues I have with the way that they did the UK and Ireland. But to spare you the details, I went in and I played around with the pieces, tried to solve them myself, or find a way that they could be solved, and long story short, I think the designers did as good as they could have here. The only change that I made was changing Ireland from a single circular 1x1 tile into the right angle curved 1x1 tile, which isn't accurate, and it's also facing the wrong way, but there's no way that you could have done that so that it didn't just look like an extension of the UK, while also retaining the kind of sharpish shape of Ireland. So yeah, credit to the designers, they did the best they could here. The next most obvious and I think less forgivable area that I think they really screwed up in terms of the landmasses is this Mediterranean area. Italy is probably the most iconic country shape in the world, and representing it with this single right-angled curved tile is not good enough. I also think Spain and the bottom of France is weirdly thin. I'm not sure what they were going for there. I think if you take a curved right angle tile and you place it just under there, I think it gives that landmass a more accurate shape and makes it look a lot nicer. I think they were worried that if they extend Italy anymore, they would bump into Tunisia. So what I think they probably should have done is take that 1x3 plate for Tunisia and change that to be a 1x2 plate, and that would bump up enough space in the Mediterranean Sea so that you could maybe make Italy maybe 2 or 3 studs long. And even if you just take the right angled curved tile, I don't know the exact name, that's just the word I'm going to use for it, and you place it like this, it kind of emulates the boot shape a lot better. So even if you just did that and then maybe a 1x1 tile, then that would replicate Italy a bit better. A lot better than they have anyway. I think that would have made the Mediterranean area look a lot better. I think they did Africa very well. The shape looks perfect, I would say. My only criticism of the Africa continent is how they did Madagascar. And again, this is accurate if you look at a map in terms of its length and its general shape, but it looks kind of weird. It looks so straight and unnatural, especially compared to the rest of the landmass. Maybe if they shortened it by one more stud, that it would have looked a lot better. But that's just like a trade-off of accuracy versus aesthetics that I'm sure the designers thought of and settled on this. And also, just this is a good point to say, I say all these things, but this is Lego. You can easily, very easily modify this to suit you, and that's what I'll do after this review. I'm just pointing out what I believe to be inaccuracies and flaws in the model by default. I think they did the Middle East very well. The 2 channels that go in there, the shape is done very well and very recognizably. I think they did India very well as well. It doesn't extend down so that it's beside Sri Lanka, but it's close enough. It's definitely forgivable within this medium, so no real complaints about that. Looking at Malaysia and Indonesia, I really don't envy the designer who tried to replicate that in this medium. That would have been an immensely difficult challenge because there's just so many islands that are so many different sizes that it would be, I would say, impossible to replicate properly with Lego. For what it's worth, I think they did as good a job as you can possibly expect at this scale. I have no real criticisms of this area. I think they nailed Japan in terms of its shape. South Korea looks a little odd, but I mean, if you look at a map, it is fairly accurate, so no complaints there. Looking at North America and Mexico specifically, I think this area in Central America is done really well for the most part, but I'm not a fan of this perfectly square section here. It's fairly accurate when you look at maps, but it doesn't look natural. I think they should have removed this 2x2 plate and this 1x1 plate, and instead replaced it with the 1x1 curved right angle tile for the bottom, another one for the top, left that stud in the middle blank so that it kind of goes in a bit more, and then you fill the last 2 studs with a single 1x2 plate. It's less accurate, I think, but it does give that inlet more of a circular shape that I think looks more natural. I think it's when you see these perfectly straight or square sections on a map, it just naturally looks weird, which is a very difficult thing to avoid when you're working with Lego. I completely recognize that, but in this instance I think it would be a fairly easy fix. The islands of the Caribbean and that general area, again, as good as you could have done. It's the same situation as with Indonesia and Malaysia. I couldn't really expect any more of that. It's a limitation of the medium, but what they did, perfectly fine by me. North America, I think they did extremely well. Similarly, I think Canada and Alaska are done pretty well. I have no real complaints about it. One area of note is Greenland, which is historically hilariously oversized on most traditional maps. But they actually did it fairly small here, which I think is a very good thing. And they also did it in white instead of green, which is, again, very accurate. I originally thought that the shape on the left of it looked a bit weird. It looked a bit too straight, so I tried turning the wedge piece here upside down to see how that looked, but that looked worse. So I turned it back the way it was, and then suddenly it just looked right. Chile looks a bit too straight for me, but I mean, it's Chile, so what can you do? I think it probably would have been helped if the absolute bottom stud was instead the curved 1x1 right angle tile in the same color, just so that it looks a bit more natural instead of just having what appears to be a 1x5 piece just kind of plonked onto the side of South America. That's all I have to say about the landmasses. Another point of concern about the design is these gaps in between. I don't really have a problem with the gaps in this. You can't really see through them, especially if you don't have a light directly behind this, which I can't imagine there would be if you placed this on a shelf or a desk. You gotta cut the designers some slack here. This is a limitation of the medium. It's never gonna be a perfect sphere. But yeah, I don't have a problem with the gaps here. I think this is as good as you can possibly have done it. Overall, I think the design is brilliant, bar a few modifications that I will make, I think. And it almost makes up for the terrible build experience of putting it together. In terms of value, this set was €200, and I think the build experience was so bad and so unenjoyable on it that it seriously detracts from the value of the set. I think the set should have been much cheaper, which is weird to say because when you have the final model in front of you and you can see it and there's so much stuff in front of you and the final display model looking as good as it does, you could look at it and say, oh yeah, 200 is fair, but the build experience was just so unenjoyable. I really can't emphasize that enough. I honestly think 160 or 170 would have been a much more fair price for this. 180 at a stretch, but 200 feels like way too much. In terms of its rankings, I'm going to put it at 45th out of 138 sets. That would put it below the Republic AV anti-vehicle cannon, but above the Republic Troopers battle pack. And that's my review of the LEGO Ideas The Globe set. Maybe I was too harsh on it, maybe I harped on the build experience too much, but it's a very important aspect to building sets for me, and this set just really disappointed me in that aspect. But overall, I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching. Farewell.